So thank you everyone for joining us on Friday afternoon. Yes, that's a big deal. And does everyone see my slide?
Yes.
So just to give you some background, we are going to give, I know all of you are familiar that you submitted the question ahead of time. So anyone who has submitted question ahead of time, we give priority to those questions. And make sure that you are muted during the office hour. And if you have any question or comment, submit it in the chat box. And after the meeting, I will email everyone a document with all the questions and answer to them. Also, I made a survey that it would be great if you answer when we are done with the office hour. Why don't we start with our panelists to introduce themselves, and then we can go over the question and start the virtual office hour. Laura, why don't you introduce yourself?
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Laura Tu, and I am an extension agent with UF-IFAS Florida Sea Grant. I'm up in the Panhandle in Walton and Okaloosa County in between Destin and Panama City, if you're familiar with that area. But I have over 30 years of aquaculture experience in both research and extension, and probably about 10 years in hobby scale aquaponics at this point.
Great, thank you. Jackson?
Hi, my name is Jackson Gross. I'm a professor at the University of California, Davis in the Department of Animal Science. I'm the Cooperative Extension Aquaculture Specialist for the state. I'm also the California Director for the Western Region Aquaculture Center for USDA. I've been working with reproduction and development in aquatic organisms for over 20 years. I'm kind of a jack of many trades, kind of a work at the interface between biology and engineering. So people are always surprised with the breadth sometimes of my questions. So anyway, I'm looking forward to being part of this.
Thank you, Jackson. And my name is Razia Farzad, and I'm an assistant professor and seafood safety extension specialist here at University of Florida. I live in Gainesville, and my experience with aquaculture is from my PhD study that I did lots of research on production of novel feed for aquaculture. So I'm not as experienced as Laura and Jackson, but it's great that we have them on the panel to answer your questions. So let's just start with the first question. The first question that I received was, what are some of the newest efficiency for lowering costs of running an operation? And Jackson and Laura, please feel free to answer the question.
I'll start. We chatted about this a bit yesterday, but one of the newest things that I'm hearing a lot about is nanobubbles. And this is all to increase the amount of dissolved oxygen within recirculating aquaculture systems or aquaponics systems. And it seems to be a fairly new, fairly easy technology. And there's some other techniques people are using to increase the oxygen in the systems to be able to increase their fish density and their plant health. In fact, we're going to put a link to a recent recirculating aquaculture workshop that they did in Ohio last week. And there was a good bit of discussion there on how they're using home oxygen generators to increase aquaculture instead of going with the traditional type of liquid oxygen system.
Thank you, Laura. I just sent everyone the link to that workshop that you mentioned. Jackson, do you have anything to add to that?
You know, I find this question kind of very broad, and I find it difficult to answer because aquaponics, when we're talking about that, like when we're talking about efficiencies, new efficiencies, and it's so broad in how people actually apply aquaponics or recirculating aquaculture. Is this outside? Is it in a greenhouse? You know, what's the scale you're working at? Are you talking deep water culture versus vertical farming? There's all sorts of ways to approach that question. Even efficiencies, I think some of the biggest efficiencies that that need to be addressed and not a lot of people talk about is work efficiency, actually in the farm. How are we farming? Am I having to take 20 steps this way to grab my harvest and then bring it over another 20 steps to bring it over here? And so what are the labor efficiencies and a lot of the issues around that, and getting our work done and being efficient there? And so when we talk about like, recent efficiencies, I think those are places that we really need to be looking at and highlighting in these work environments. And sometimes, you see people like, oh, we're going to coat the entire place, and there's not a single, walkway, and except for the 4 feet on one side and 4 feet on the other, and I'm 100 feet across. Well, how do you know what's going on in the middle of your crops, right? Is there pests there? Are they getting nutrients? You can't see that. And so even work efficiencies in how do we monitor, can I see every plant every single day and go through my farm and say, yes, that's, oh, we're having a pest issue over here. So there's when we're talking about efficiencies in aquaponics, in recirculating aquaculture, there's a lot of different things. So I will highlight another technology. One of the things that I think needs to be looked at is, and again, it's going to be different too in climates, right? If I'm talking to somebody who's farming in the mountains, which we have in California, versus people farming in the desert or in the Central Valley where it's, it's hot and can be humid. You guys deal with a lot of more humidity and rain than we do. Moisture is one of the biggest problems in aquaponics because it causes mold and fungus and everything. And so people do that many different ways. So they lose efficiencies in how they operate their greenhouses. So using there's technologies that are dehydrators that are better than burning propane to heat and then opening vents to degas and playing this balance system all the time. So there's new greenhouse dehydration technologies, I think, that are coming on too, that I have some benefits. Long answer.
No, I like that point, Jackson. You're absolutely right. It is a broad question. And if whoever asked that wants to give us some more detail in the chat, if there was something specific you were looking for, but definitely when you mentioned labor, that's a huge one. And there's kind of been a proliferation of monitoring systems coming on the market. The prices have really come down. So I would also like to see more work and research in the area of using monitoring systems for water quality and controlling greenhouse environment.
Great, thank you. So moving on to our next question, we had a question about what fish and plant species would be recommended for a backyard aquaponics setup.
That's a good question. And I'll start with this, Laura, because I'm actually very critical of this. So I think the first, again, this is a very difficult question to ask or answer, I should say. It's a good, easy question to ask, I think, and it's a fair question to ask. What is a good species to utilize for my aquaponics? And so the first question I want to know, if you came to me and said, Dr. Gross, I'm really interested, I really want to go into this business, I want to grow, and I say, what is it that you want to grow? And are you planning on being an aquaculture producer, or are you planning on producing vegetables? And it's the vegetables that's your cash flow, right? I mean, if it takes months and months to raise fish, if you said, I want to raise sturgeon, well, you're not going to monetize that sturgeon if it's a male for 4 years. I mean, 8 years, 9 years, 10 years, if it's caviar female. So what is your goal to, use those fish? And so that's the first place, is this for protein? Are you, and then the other question is how good of a farmer are you? Are you a good aquaculturist? That's the other thing. What's your experience level on this? So those are some of the first questions that I ask. Now I'll pass that off to Laura before I get even more into this.
I love that. How good of a farmer are you? We should just get t-shirts that say that. So I always, great advice from Jackson, as always. In Florida, and in any state, first off, you have to be careful about state regulations. A lot of states have specific regulations prohibiting some type of species. And in Florida, for example, we're prohibited from raising tilapia on a hobby scale in the panhandle, but you can do it in the peninsula. And so you need to really first check your state regulations and see what fish are even permitted. Then I like to recommend that you find a fish that either you're going to eat, if you're wanting to raise a food product, or if you're just looking for it to fuel your system, like Jackson was talking, and mostly produce vegetables, then you can look at koi, goldfish, carp, some maybe non-edible fish, but that are very tolerant, easy to raise, easy to find. You need to find a supplier in your area because you will kill fish. Everybody kills fish. I still kill fish after 30 years. Well, maybe Jackson doesn't. He's looking.
I'm a toxicologist. But,
yeah, everybody kills fish. So having an easy, inexpensive supply of fingerlings is important. And then being able to purchase the food that particular fish needs on a local basis is very important, especially for backyard aquaponics, because he gets people wanting to raise sturgeon. The calls I get are people wanting to raise jade perch because they heard about it as popular species in Australia, or barramundi, another popular species in Australia. Those type of fingerlings aren't available to us. To import them would be it would take years and would be a huge hassle. So start with something easy. You can always change your species later, but something convenient, cheap, and easy is what I recommend.
And just expanding on that, size, when you talk about easy, we're meaning like, well, we have tolerances, right? So in an aquaponic environment, you have a cold environment? Do you have a warm environment? What is your space like? Are you going to grow a fish that's going to be 8 feet, in 4 years, or is it going to stay small? And, you have a lot of them. So understanding, your environment. I get trout too. People want to talk to me about farming trout all the time. Trout require really, really clean water, which is not really conducive to traditional aquaponics. And, I think one thing would be a good place for us to talk about, like, how do we define aquaponics? I think because what I think, and probably what Laura thinks, and what Razia's experiences are, could be very different than, sometimes people who want to do it in the backyard, or who want to do it at small commercial scale, or in really super large commercial scale, such as Superior Fresh, like in Wisconsin or some of these other locations. And so I think that might be a good place. So, Laura's more experienced with Florida. So why don't you, what is it? How is aquaponics defined, the practice of aquaponics in Florida?
Well, mostly I deal with hobby scale growers up here in the Panhandle, but we have several large commercial operators around the state now. We're very conducive. We have a good temperature, a good climate year round. We have ample water. We have an agriculture history. So there's a lot of, and an aquaculture history, a lot of support from our Department of Agriculture and University of Florida. So it's a growing number of aquaponics here. Again, most of them are using tilapia because that's the easiest, especially the commercial people. And when I was in Ohio, I used bluegill, yellow perch, and tilapia. Since I moved to Florida, I've only had catfish in my system because, again, I'm backyard hobby scale, so I am not permitted to use tilapia.
Thank you, Laura. As Jackson and Laura said, this is a topic that depends on regulation, environment, and economy. I found a very good EDIS document that can help you some basic information, especially about Florida and the regulations that we have in place. It's on the chat, but I'm going to email to everyone after the office hour as well. Moving on to our next question.
Actually, we have a question. We have a question in the chat about tropical or koi fish that you could sell live. And I think that I think the answer is yes. I think those are great candidates, koi and other tropical fish that you're not worried about, constantly harvesting. One of the things that we talk about is how often are you changing your fish over, right? Because you start moving your fish around, then you change your nutrient level, right? And you're balancing your nutrient level with your crops, your vegetable crops. And so knowing what that is and managing that is really important in dictating the aquaponic system. You know, I just want to say, you know, I work with a lot more commercial growers and actually fish farms where we're not limited by nutrients. And so actually, in fact, you know, a lot of people talk about aquaponics being that the water from the fish goes through with the bioreactor, and then the bioreactor, it goes to the plants and then back to the fish. That's not how I do it. In fact, I have my recirculating aquaculture system tucked away over here. In fact, it's a mile away. I fill up a tank of, I do all my work there. I fill up a big tanker of water. I drive that tanker over to my greenhouse operations, and I dump that water into a large cistern in my greenhouse, and I use that water and I adjust the nutrient levels accordingly. And I use my biological nutrient water, my biological hydroponic solution into my greenhouse. And so that is completely decoupled. And so, and I think later on, we'll be able to talk about why that's, you know, why I do that differently when we look at a couple other questions that came along. So I think koi and other tropical fish are great candidates. Koi, you know, they're carp, they're cyprinid, they're very tolerant. So
yeah, and they work well in the coupled systems. I deal with mostly coupled. Jackson does uncoupled, but just remember, in most states, if you're going to sell live fish, you have to have a permit. So find out who your permitting agency is. In Florida, it's the Department of Agriculture.
Great, thank you. So the next question that we had is, what is the best source for information about mineralization of aquaculture waste to break down solid waste?
Oh, me, okay. So, you know, there's not a lot of really good information out there in the sense of, because we're using this word mineralization, which isn't really a technical term. And so what you're really talking about is wastewater treatment. And this is called, in the wastewater treatment world, this is called suspended growth aerobic digestion. And so basically what they're doing is they're taking that organic waste, and then they're pumping a lot of oxygen in it. A lot of, you know, in people who do shrimp, call it biofloc. It's the same exact thing, biofloc, mineralization, suspended growth aerobic digestion. So I think what happens is people are looking for this one term, mineralization. There's not a lot of information out there. There's a textbook, there's a recent text, and I forgot to give a link to it to Razia.
I think I sent her the link.
Yes, you
oh,
did.
you did, great, thank you. Yeah, there's a text on it where they cover it in depth. I know that Dr. Leonard covers that in some of his material, but you know, it's really just bubbling your fish poop and allowing the bacteria to do its thing and put their stuff into solution and breaking that down. I think, but you need to measure, you know, the things you need to know is pH, your hardness of your water, you know, you know, the amount of oxygen and the nutrients you're putting into your system to operate it. If it smells, you're doing it wrong. I mean, that's usually you know, a good signal for you to gauge.
Yeah, and I've seen this gain some traction recently with the mineralization. I know in the original University of the Virgin Islands systems, they do have a type of mineralization that they do there. But for the small scale systems that I've run, we've never really needed it. We never really have a lot of nutrient deficiencies just because the scale is much smaller than a commercial scale. And the challenge that I have with mineralization is something that Jackson touched on. I have a hard time even getting some of my growers to monitor their water quality, very simple water quality. So then when you start having to also monitor your nutrients and to see if they're ready to be like put back into the system, it's a lot more work and something that a lot of small scale hobby growers just don't want to deal with. So I personally don't do it on my system because I don't have any problem growing all the plants I want with just, you know, 25 fish.
Great.
Yeah, I think that's going to come, we're going to come back to that point later on when we talk about pest management.
Yes, we can actually move on to that question. We had a question about how should I supplement iron and potassium in an aquaponic system?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I just buy a little bit of chelated iron and then I put in a couple of teaspoons into my sump, especially if I'm growing fruiting plants and especially during the months where production is much higher. And that's pretty much all I do. And I just look at leaf color and try to basically determine any nutrient deficiencies based on the color of my leaves and whether my blooms are actually turning into fruits.
What I'm not a big proponent of putting iron into my sump. And I think that depending on how you also farm your fish, like that iron moving around in your system, if it's, again, decoupled versus coupled and putting things into your water, right, is one of the challenges, adding things to your water because there's adjuvants and other things there that could have a negative effect on your fish, whether it's a negative effect on the flavor profile, off flavor, or, you know, we talk about, you know, having a mortality event. I'm actually a big proponent of a foliar spray for iron. I'd prefer to do that than put that into my sumps, regardless of whether I was doing a coupled or decoupled aquaponics. And then you know, and then for potassium, I use potassium nitrate, and you know, it's good for also reducing my pH to a more beneficial pH for the plants, which is different from my fish. And you know, again, I know my nitrate levels, so I know how much nitrate I can put into my system before I dump a bunch of potassium nitrate into it as well. So again, comes down to, are you measuring? Are you watching your plants? Are you looking at your plants every single day? Are you seeing, you know, the health of your plants? That sometimes also dictates how you handle it. But that's exactly how we do it in our greenhouse: foliar spray with iron and potassium nitrate supplementation. Because in aquaponics, iron can be limiting, potassium can be limiting, phosphorus can be limiting, and I believe calcium can be also limiting. So
and a lot of it depends on what kind of water quality you start out with. Like we have notoriously low alkalinities and hardness up here in the panhandle, yet our water is also very acidic. So it does, you know, just what is your makeup water? So again, it all comes back to measuring and knowing your system.
Right. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. We had another question kind of related to this. How can I control aphids and white flies in an aquaponic system?
Again, I think you'll probably maybe have a different answer for me. Small coupled system, you have probably fewer options because your fish are connected to your plants. But and in the greenhouse I'm in, it's at the county extension office. So I'm not the only one in there. There's other people in there. So I have to take that into consideration. So I just use the yellow sticky traps. Although I also have used just wiping the leaves to try to, you know, get the bugs off. And again, it comes down to that daily look. When, you know, when you start seeing them appear, you got to jump on them right away because they can get out of control fast.
Thank you.
I do. I want, before I go on, I do want to mention my aquaponic program manager had texted me earlier. He said that if you're organic farming, he said they're usually adding a soluble potash, but you have to be really careful for mixing that with other things. He's also supplemented a couple systems with nothing more than EM, which is a commercial product. I'm not promoting it. Actually, I personally have never used it. I know he has. It could be, some people consider it a little bit on the expensive side, and compost tea. And part of the reason he said that is because a fear of harming his fish. So on a circulating system. So okay. So the other question was on aphids and whitefly.
Yes.
Again, this is, it's like it's another really broad question. Is this an acute thing? Is this a chronic situation, right? And so that's like one of the first things, you know, why do we have aphids? Why are we having white flies? And one of the things you'll find is that if you don't know your nutrient levels, you might be pumping in so much nitrate into your system that you're actually creating this, the aphids are attracting to your plants because they're so sweet, right? They're so sweet, and then you're proliferating. You might be growing a crop that is very preferable to aphids, you know, eggplants or some of the brassicas, right? Or at certain times of the year, right? So understanding the system and measuring your nutrients can control some of that. So again, are you indoors? Are you outdoors, right? You know, we'll do a sulfur burn in our greenhouse. I wouldn't do that with if I had a greenhouse with fish in it, right? So I'm not a big proponent of having my fish and my plants in the same space. I think my greenhouse space is property for growing plants, right? Every space in that greenhouse should be designed for plants. It's not designed for fish. You know, the algae, and I'm using space that, you know, is, you know, for my cash crop. I think we've used some neem, but you can't do sulfur burn outside. And then you have to understand how you're doing that. I think the other, we've used some neem oil. Again, are you know, before you put some oil and some other products on your plants, is it going back into your fish? Let's see. Yeah, and so I think that's the other thing, is understanding, are there certain crops that are attracting to that problem that you're looking for? And if the problem gets really bad, you know what? We shut it down, we lock the doors, and we just cook the greenhouse, and you start over.
Jackson, have you heard of anybody? I had a producer tell me they vacuum them off.
Vacuum them?
Yeah. Have you heard of that?
I've
I haven't done it. Somebody told me that that's what they did, and I was like,
You know, I think it's possible. I think it's a lot of labor.
Yeah.
The other thing I do want to say is, like, some people will do one thing on one day, and a couple days later they may do another thing. They do, you know, they're not counting on just one type of treatment, and so they rotate their treatments every couple days or weeks. I've never heard of the vacuuming off. I would imagine that you don't have a lot of plants if you're spending around vacuuming your plants, and that you have the time and labor, and maybe you're independently wealthy. That, you know, when we're talking about margins, right?
Or retired.
You're retired, yeah. I mean, listen,
like Jeffrey, he's retired. You might want to.
I'm not a big fan of chores and vacuuming. Like, you know, Sunday comes around and I got to go vacuum. It's the last thing I want to be doing at work, you know. So
we wipe ours off.
Right, you wipe them up. But again, if you had, I mean, if you had thousands of plants, right? Like, I'll have, you know, like I'll have a rack, and I'll have, you know, 800 plants in a 4x8 space, right? In a 3-tiered system. I'm not gonna, you know, and I might have, you know, many rows of that, you know. So, you know, I'm not gonna wipe, you know, we're not wiping every plant off, you know. But again, it comes down to, how do you farm? What are the efficiencies? Can you see every plant every day when you go in to do your inspections? You say, oh wait, here's some white flies. I can wipe, you know. You could handle that if you're monitoring your plants and managing your farm, and those work efficiencies that we talked about in that first question. So, you know, you put a flag down and say, oh, as I go through, I go, this flag is white flies, or this is a disease issue, or this is a whatever. And then you come back through and you got a couple. Yeah, you could do something like that. You can handle that. But, and are you using good pest management practices, right? Do you have a lot of sticky flags, or what are those things called? I was losing my words. The sticky stuff, you know.
Sticky traps.
Sticky traps. Thank you. Are you monitoring? Are you constantly monitoring? Do you know the level of infection that you have? So, you know, integrated pest management.
Thank you. Before moving to next question, there is a question in the chat from Mary. I think it's from you, Jackson. She asked, how do you measure iron chelate for a foliage spray?
How do I measure it?
Yes.
I mean, I think we just followed it. I think I just followed the instructions on the bottle, and it's like whatever the concentration is, and do a general just light spray over it. I mean, you're going to see like an immediate response. I'm not like over technical because I'm not mixing it in my sumps and water is moving around and so I mean, basically I'm just following the instructions on that. So I don't know. Yeah, I don't have a measurement for you. Truthfully, I'm not the one who does it. So
okay. So the next question is actually from Jeff. Do you want to ask your question, Jeff? So I don't.
I am a resident of the west coast of Florida, where there is an abundance, a proliferation of oysters. And having had some experience in a failed bivalve recirculating system at the University of Delaware, yeah, I take a special interest in some of these, and they are very good to eat. But I have been warned. So my question was, is there an office or a lab I can send water quality samples to and organism samples to see if in fact, the E. coli levels or coliform levels should I be concerned about that? And if I did a risk assessment, and apparently there's some other organism that I can't recall that maybe is endemic or populates this population down here that I should be concerned about.
I can start with answering this question. Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services actually do water testing of various shellfish harvesting area. I can send you the website on the chat, but they send the samples to Apalachicola Shellfish Laboratory.
Yes, they do.
So I think they have a good resources that you can find online. If you want, I can find other laboratories that are certified and do this kind of testing. If you want to send your samples to a lab and analyze it yourself, that's something that I can provide to you, like other laboratories that do this kind of testing. Laura, do you have something to add to that?
Are you talking about wild harvesting oysters?
Well, I don't know what the word wild means. I'm just a resident and I'm able to harvest them off of the substrate. These are all seawalls that are, gotcha. I mean, they're just covered up, billions, if not trillions, and they're edible and they're nice. They're just want to be safe.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Is there anybody that can testify? Is there any good advice that's more qualitative than quantitative? Like don't harvest after a rain, that kind of stuff.
Again, yeah, go ahead, Laura.
I would just say that Leslie Sturmer is our University of Florida Sea Grant shellfish extension person, and she's extremely knowledgeable. She is the one who runs the Cedar Key operation and the website I was telling you about. She stays extremely busy, so it may not be a quick turnaround to your answer, as you can imagine, but she's great. And she would be able to tell you what you needed to be, if you need to be looking at something, if you should just forget the idea, if it's a great idea, is there time of year you should do it, after a rain, that type of thing. She would be your person.
Okay, Sterner or Stormer, you said?
Yes, I just sent information of Leslie in the chat. Okay.
Well, there is quite a bit of information about the shellfish in this area. We're kind of in between a don't harvest and it's okay to harvest area. So and the last survey was done, I think it was 1999. So. Okay, well, thank you very much.
Of course, thank you for the question.
Let me just pipe in real fast.
Sure.
So shellfish sanitation is really, really important to the shellfish industry. And so, you know, the public health sector monitors those. My mentor, Dr. Fred Conte, who recently passed, has written a lot of papers on modeling for shellfish sanitation issues. And traditionally, soon after rains, right, they shut down the industries, you know, especially when you're just downstream from a lot of ag or urban environments, you know, and so usually there's a few day window to flush everything out, and the organisms filter that, you know, I mean, that's what they're great for, filtering, right? But they also filter it in and they can filter it out. And so on that. And so, and also understanding, depending on where you are, your water temperatures are also key, you know, for, you know, other potential pathogens, Vibrio species and things like that, that could be lethal to you. So understanding the water temperatures and the species at which you're harvesting and consuming. So are you keeping them at you know, these lower temperatures, which keep those pathogens down, which is not risk to you. So these are, you know, those are your questions are very warranted. And so yeah, so that affects, I think, the entire shellfish industry. So which is very important, and they do monitor that heavily.
Yes, and eat the shellfish cooked. That's another solution. Okay. We can move on to the next question. So there was a question about, is aquaponics eligible for agricultural financing?
So I'll start. Of course, it's eligible. Everything's eligible. Is it easy? No. In my experience, aquaculture and aquaponics it's very hard to get traditional commercial financing. And there's a couple of reasons for this. Bankers don't really understand aquaculture and aquaponics, and there have been a lot of failures in the industry. And so it's considered high risk. And so there are certain programs that are geared towards new and beginning farmers, which tend to be a little bit more flexible in their requirements. And if you can get like a secured loan, an agriculture secured loan from like the Farm Service Agency, then, you know, that's possible too. But in my experience, you're eligible, but it's a challenge to get. I don't know about in California, Jackson, what's your situation there?
So, you know, I think it brings up a good point that you talk about being eligible and bankers not understanding it. And for some reason, I'm not sure why we continue to talk about aquaponics as if this is some mystery thing. It's hydroponics. This is hydroponic plant production systems. You know, so, and you talk about hydroponics and no one has a problem with financing, right? And so why are we talking about like where our nutrients are from, right? No one questions, well, where's the nutrients for the hydroponics from? You know, is that bat guano? I mean, what is that, the nutrients? I mean, or the, you know, the cow manure? I mean, we talk about that all the time. So, I mean, this is hydroponic plant production. And so we tend to get like, for some reason, this like romantic idea about aquaponics being this like mystery thing. It's just an element of challenge because you're trying to balance, you're trying to be good at recirculating aquaculture systems. You're trying to be good at understanding how to raise a fish, the biology of the fish, right? The microbiology of your systems. And then also you have to understand how to farm, you know, be a farmer and grow plants, you know, a plant farmer. So, and then the other thing is when we're talking about financing, we laugh, we call it the lettuce trap, right? People think, oh, we're gonna grow lettuce, right? Because it's one of the easiest things to grow. It is. It's also one of the cheapest things to grow. I joke around with I have a group that farms caviar. I'm like, you guys are a walking contradiction, right? You guys have this award-winning craft caviar, right? Which is a very expensive craft product, right? California is known for its specialty crops. And then you turn around and you're trying to grow one of the cheapest products out there, lettuce. And you're going to compete with Salinas and Watsonville and Arizona on their lettuce production prices. And there's so many more economical, high value products that we should be growing in aquaponics. Now, again, are we, are we feeding our families, or are we, it sounds like this question is about having a business, right? So we're running a business. So it's a different question, whether how I'm feeding my family in my backyard aquaponics and giving to my neighbors or whatever, but versus like I'm running a business. So, everything's, oh, I'm going to sell lettuce. I'm like, why not grow basil? Why not take that basil and make pesto? I mean, there's all sorts of different ways to think about this. Why not grow just tomato starts? Why do I have to grow tomatoes, right? And I could take those starts and put them over in all the stores. Flowers. There's all sorts of ways to make money in this business, and it's hydroponic plant production. We're just using, when we talk about aquaponics, we're using a biological nutrient solution, the secret sauce, right? And versus a mineral solution, which is using, chemicals, chemistry. So anyway, I think that's how I think about aquaponics, and I think the challenge is to demystify it and not make this, so like you said, the bankers don't understand it. Well, yeah, because we talk about it in a way that people don't understand it. I mean, it's funny that way.
Yeah, I just put a huge link in the chat. I was trying to link a YouTube video real quick, and my technology challenge self is showing. But Auburn University just recently did a really great webinar on economics of aquaponics. Dr. Terry Hansen, who's been a longtime aquaculture economist there at Auburn. So it's available on YouTube, and they did the same thing. They did one crop, and it was cucumbers. And yeah, they were successful raising cucumbers, and they were successful raising fish, but because of the market price, they couldn't make it. But you're so right. That's a great job encouraging people to think out of the box. Don't fall into the lettuce trap. Now, if you're growing for yourself, it's a different story. You want a variety of things, and you want to grow what you're going to eat and what's important to you. But if you're wanting to do it for a business, business planning and really thinking through some of these things Jackson just mentioned are really important.
Great. Actually, the last question that we have from people is, like, you kind of answered it, and is that is there any really living, can we really make living out of this business, and where can we sell our fish?
Yeah, I do know people that are making a good living out of it. There's also a term in our industry called an aqua shyster, and you always have to be cautious of this. This is somebody that's maybe selling aquaponics systems, but they're not really doing aquaponics themselves. They're making money selling consulting and the systems, and you have to be real careful whether it's legitimate or not. But I worked with several farms in Ohio that were successful. One of them did a lettuce club, which is like a community supported agriculture to start out. And then they graduated, they got big enough, they moved to start selling at a farmer's market because they had enough variety at the farmer's market. Well, they're in Columbus, Ohio, so it's a different, you have to know your place. But a lot of chefs come to the Columbus market, and they ended up hooking up with a lot of chefs directly, and now they sell almost entirely directly to restaurants and do just fine. And their fish, they have a unique thing. They buy from a local fish farmer, the fingerlings, they buy yellow perch, then they raise them up, and then they sell them back to that same fish farmer who sells them with the rest. So they don't have to have a separate market for their fish. They just have an agreement with the fish farmer. So again, their cash crop is their vegetables, not necessarily the fish. They get a little bit of gravy from the fish if everything goes well. Trader Hills is a good example of a beautiful farm here in Florida that does a lot of marketing their products. You can go to their Facebook page, but they're a good example. So yes, you can make money doing this. You just have to, like every business, careful business planning and really thinking it through. Don't do it and then try to sell it. Get it working on paper before you start getting into investing in the system.
Yeah. If you're growing aquaponic cannabis, right? Are you growing, I mean, there's all, can you make a business? You have to have a market, right? Do you have a market for what you're growing, right? That's the first place. So depending on what you're growing and all your work efficiencies and how you're operating your system and how much energy are you using solar, right? Do you have to heat your greenhouse and then cool your greenhouse, right? Are you running fans to really flush all this stuff out? You know, how are you farming, right? So what's your energy consumption, right? What's your labor efficiencies? So can you make money? Absolutely. You just have to, you wouldn't ask that about any farmer. I mean, a lot of people think farmers don't make money. And that's true too, right? I mean, it depends on how you farm. What are you farming? What are your markets? Are you direct selling? Are you just giving it to a distributor? Are you going to a farmer's market? How do you conduct your business? Are you selling to high-end specialty chefs, right? And they want microgreens and they want their shiso, right? They want only purple leaves and they all have to be this size, and we'll pay you to select them and provide them just like that, right? So again, understanding the markets and who you're providing, you know, your products to is really important going into it. So yes, you can make money, and it's a business like anything else. Growing, you know, using hydroponics, using biological nutrient solution, you can make money. You know, you want to grow violas, right? And they put the little flower on your butternut squash soup, right? And you're selling flowers. There's all sorts of ways to monetize aquaponics. You can sell the fish waste, right? Mm-hmm. You can sell. You could do microgreens, which doesn't even require aquaponics, though it's, you know, it could use aquaponics. So again, it's understanding what what's your business model, who you're selling to, and then once you get that going, say, hey, I could also provide, you know, here's some other products that we are also making. Would something like this be interesting to you? You know, and getting that out there. So again, it's this like misconception of that aquaponics is some mysterious thing, and it's not. But again, we talk about, are you doing aquaculture? Are you selling fish, right? If I would say that if you're trying to make money selling fish, it better be a fish that's worth a lot of money. Koi, we talked about earlier, or sturgeon, right? Like fish that you could, but again, the cash flow is not in the fish. The cash flow is in the vegetable crops, the turnover, right? Lettuce, 4 or 5 weeks, right? Depending on temperatures and some of these other crops. So I tend to tell people, don't think about, we might want to do aquaponics, and I think it's great, and do that. The biological nutrients, I think, is the secret sauce. But make money, make your business around the crops, the plants. And so, be clear what your focus is.
Great, thank you. Laura, do you have anything to add to that?
I was just going to bring up, since we had a few more minutes and we didn't have any other, there's new in the chat. Trader Sit, let's see. Design of low budget aquaponics systems. I don't think there's a lot of research going on in the design of the low budget aquaponics system, but there is a lot of information out there. And one that Jax and I both agree on is the FAO manual. Did you put the link to that one?
I'm gonna send it to the chat now.
Yeah, that's a great one to start with as far as a very low budget aquaponic system. Another one that you'll see thrown around is the barrelponics. It was invented by a teacher for classroom use, but it's a nice homemade one that a lot of people start out with. And you can go down the rabbit hole on YouTube and see that it's been redesigned umpteen million different ways. But there's not a lot of research going on those type of system designs, not university type research. There's a lot of research within the industry. I think people are always trying to make it better. And I mean, that's just the nature of farmers. They're always trying to improve and build those efficiencies that Jackson was talking about. I wanted to make a comment about the farmers market. There was a Facebook chat not long ago. Some person wanted to know if there's any local farmers market. Somebody suggested one. They're like, oh no, their prices are way too high. And it is funny, like people think that farmers should sell their stuff for cheap. And they just don't realize that the smaller you are, the more it costs you to produce that food. And so somebody who sells to a farmer's market is typically smaller, so they have high production costs. So the benefit of you as a customer going there is that you get to know your farmer, you know where the food was raised, and you're helping support keeping money in local versus going to Walmart and buying jalapenos from Mexico. So there's still a lot of misconceptions within your community. So I liked it that Jackson said, know your market. Do you have a farmer's market where people sell things really cheap, or do you have a farmer's market where people are willing to pay more because they want to support the local farmers and local production?
Not only that, but I'll just add to that, right? That food was harvested today, right?
Yeah.
That is the most healthy food that you could probably, not knowing how they're farming, right? That food may look healthy and not have any nutritional value whatsoever. Like I would step back for there for a second, but just on the basis of there's a significant loss of nutritional value from the moment that plant is harvested, and by the time it gets to you. So by the time if it's harvested and it gets on a truck, or then it has to get on a boat, and then it gets trucked overseas, and it gets to your store, and then it gets on the shelf. How old is that? How long has that been since it's been harvested? And now you're bringing it home and you're putting it in your refrigerator, and you may not eat it for a couple of days. It might be a week, right? You go to farmer's market, that stuff was harvested that day. You're getting the, and look at the carbon footprint of that crop, that plant, and you're getting the maximum nutritional value of the food that you're getting when you're buying usually in that situation.
Yeah.
So is that more valuable? To me it would be, right? Like, I mean, otherwise I'm just eating cardboard. I'm going to eat a bunch of carbon.
To me also, and we have two different swings in our county. We have a south end where people are more than willing to pay, double, triple. But then up in the north end, it's a whole different economy up here. And
absolutely.
Yeah. So you have to know, that's, when you made that comment about know your market. Right. Don't expect to sell, $10 head of butter crunch lettuce if you live in an area that can't afford that.
But it doesn't have to be, right? The urban farming and all this other stuff, it doesn't have to be expensive, right?
Right.
And so there's a big movement to getting, lower cost, faster, food to market and getting to people. Yeah. There's some products cost more. I mean, they do. And should, if they can get that price, they're trying to get that price. They're trying to have their business.
But the people that are on this webinar, if you're wanting to grow, you have to know what your cost of production is so that you can charge accordingly.
Great, thank you. With that, we don't have any other question that people pre-submitted. If anyone has any question, you can unmute yourself and ask a question, or you can send the question in the chat. I also just send a link to our survey. I really appreciate if you take the time and answer the survey. It's not going to take more than 1 minute, but it's really valuable for us to see your feedback for our future programming.